Hello everyone. I welcome you all to this lesson. Today I'm going to discuss on the topic Mozart, the boy musician, which is written by Kate Dickinson Sweetser. So here I begin. And before that, let me ask you, have you subscribed to my channel? If you have not subscribed up till now, then please do. And watch the video till end and press the like button, as I'm sure you will like it. And yes, don't forget to hit the bell icon for my latest notification. And your comments is a source of motivation for me. So do leave a comment below. So children, let us start with this beautiful short story, Mozart, the boy musician. First of all, children, let us know something about the author Kate Dickinson Sweetser. She was an American author. She was born in New York City and is known for writing juvenile fiction and compilations. She was the cousin of the famous poet Emily Dickinson. Now children, let us know about the famous boy musician Mozart. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, this was his full name, was born in 1756 and died in 1791. He was an 18th century musician and composer. He was born on January 27, 1756 in Salzburg, Austria. Austria, children, it is a country in Central Europe. Mozart showed special musical talent from a very young age. His father was a well-known violinist and composer. He was a prolific artist, composer, and created a string of operas, concerts, symphonies, and sonatas that profoundly shaped classical music. It seemed as if music was in his blood, and started playing in public at the age of 6. As his father taught his sister, encouraged her, and guided her to play music, Mozart at that time was only 3 years of age, and he showed a strong understanding of chords, tonality, and tempo. He showed signs of excelling beyond his father's teaching with an early composition at the age of 5 and demonstrating outstanding ability on harpsichord and the violin. Mozart's sister Nanuri was also musical talented. Both the children performed together in many places in Europe. They played for kings and performed with the famous musician. When he was 8 years old, Mozart wrote his first symphony. You know, children, what is symphony? A symphony is a very long, complicated piece of music that is meant for an entire orchestra, a large group of musicians playing many different instruments to play. When he was 11, Mozart wrote his first opera. An opera is a special kind of play that is sung and set music. As a teenager, Mozart worked as a musician at Salzburg, position as he was not paid well in Salzburg court, but grew restless and travelled in search of better position as he was not paid well. At the age of 21, he moved to Vienna, where he achieved fame but little financial security. He achieved lots of success in Vienna. He played concerts, he composed operas, and he got married. Unfortunately, he did not manage his money well, and despite his success, Mozart was often in financial difficulties. Mozart died in 1791 when he was only 35 years of age. No one is sure how he died. We only know that he was very sick. When music today, when he died, he was buried in a small choir ceremony. His music today, more than 200 years old, 100 years after his death, Mozart's music is world famous and still very popular. So children, this was the summary of the story Mozart, the boy musician. Now children, I'll read the story in detail. So listen carefully. Johannes Chris Thomas Wolfgangs Theophilus Mozart. What a big name, isn't it, children? What a burden to be put upon a baby's tiny shoulders. If there is any truth underlying the belief that a name can, in some measure, foreshadow a child's future, then surely Wolfgang Mozart, who was born in Salzburg in 1756, came honestly by his heritage of greatness. For when he was only a day old, he received the five-part name, to which was later added his confirmation name of Sigismundus. But as soon as he could choose for himself the little son of Marina and Leopold Mozart from his store of names, selected Wolfgang, to which he added Amadeus, by which combination he was always known, and the name is forever linked with the memory of the great genius. Almost before he could talk plainly, the little fellow showed himself to be a musical prodigy. When he was scarcely 3 years old, he would steal into the room where his father was giving a lesson on harpsichord to Anna. You know, children, who was Anna? She was the sister, 5-year-old than himself. 56 came honestly by his heritage of greatness. For when he was only a day old, he received the five-part name, to which was later added his confirmation name of Sigismundus. But as soon as he could choose for himself the little son of Mariana and Leopold Mozart from his store of names, selected Wolfgang, to which he added Amadeus, by which combination he was always known, and the name is forever linked with the memory of the great genius. Almost before he could talk plainly, the little fellow showed himself to be a musical prodigy, and when he was scarcely 3 years old, he would steal into the room where his father was giving a lesson on the harpsichord to Anna, or Nannerl, as she was called, the sister 5 years older than him. And when she was being taught, Wolfgang would listen and watch with breathless attention. One day, when the lesson was over, he begged his father to teach him too, but Leopold Mozart only laughed as he answered, glancing down into the child's serious face, looking so intently into his. Wait, my little man, thou art but a baby yet. Wait a while, my Wolfer. And the disappointed little musician crept away. But as soon as Nanin and his father had left the room, the tiny fellow crept back again, went to the harpsichord, and standing on tiptoe, touched the keys with his chubby fingers stretched wide apart until he reached and played a perfect chord. Leopold Mozart was in another part of the house, but his sensitive ear caught the sound, and he rushed back to find his baby on tiptoe before the harpsichord, giving the first hint of his marvelous ability. At once, the proud and excited father began to give him lessons, and always, too, from that day, whenever his sister had her lesson, Wolfgang perched on his father's knee and listened with rapt absorption. And often, when the lesson was over, he would repeat what she had played in exact imitation of her manner of playing. Leopold Mozart, who was himself a talented musician, saw with pride almost beyond expression that both of his children inherited his musical ability, and soon felt that Wolfgang was a genius. When the boy was only 4, his father, to test his powers, tried to teach him some minutes which, to his perfect astonishment, Wolfgang played after him in a most extraordinary manner, not merely striking the notes correctly, but marking the rhythm with accurate expression. And to learn and play each minute, the little fellow required only half an hour. When he was 5 years old, one day his father entered the sitting room of their room and found Wolfgang bending over a table, writing so busily that he did not hear his father enter or see that he was standing beside him. Wolfgang's chubby little hand held the pen awkwardly, but held it with firm determination, while it travelled back and forth across a large sheet of paper on which he was scribbling a strange collection of hieroglyphics, and with here and there a huge blot, testifying to his haste and inexperience in the use of ink. What was he trying to do? His father's curiosity finally overcame him, and he asked, "What are you doing, Wolfgang?" The curly head was raised with an impatient gesture. "I am composing a concerto for the harpsichord. I have nearly finished the first part." "Let me see it." "No, please, I have not yet finished." But even as he spoke, the eager father had taken up the paper and carried it over to where a friend stood, and they looked it over together, exchanging amused glances at the queer characters on it. Presently, Leopold Mozart, after looking carefully at it, said, "Why, it really seems to be composed by rule, but it is so difficult that no one could ever play it." "Oh, yes, they could, but it must be studied first," exclaimed the little Wolfgang eagerly, and running to the harpsichord, he added, "See, this is the way it begins," and he was able to play enough of it to show what his idea in writing it had been. And his father and the friend, who had before exchanged glances of amusement, now looked at each other with wonder not untouched with awe. In the Mozart collections of Salzburg, there is still preserved a music book in which those early pieces written by little Wolfgang were written down by his father, and also the minutes he learned. And in the book his father wrote after him. The preceding minutes were learned by Wolfgang in his 4th year. And further on we find the record. This minute and trio Wolfgang learned in half an hour on the 26th day of January 1761, the day before his 5th birthday, at 9:30 at night. In his first composition, the sense of perfect form is felt to a remarkable degree, and the little book in which it was written down not only accompanied the family on their travels, but in it Wolfgang also wrote down his first sonatas published in 1763. When he was not much over 5 years old, Wolfgang was chosen to take the part of chorister in a Latin comedy, which was given at the close of the school year of the Salzburg Gymnasium, and among the 150 young people who took part in the entertainment, one can picture the charming little musical fellow as a great feature of the occasion. And many stories were told at that time of his marvelous sense of sound and the ease with which he overcame every technical difficulty. Meanwhile, he learned to play on the violin and could tell, it is said, when one violin was an eighth of a tone lower than another. Even games, to be interesting to him, had to be accompanied by music. And a family friend in writing of him says, "If he and I carried playthings from one room to another, the one who went empty-handed must sing and play a march on the violin as he talked." On an evening when a number of violinists were gathered in Mozart's home to play together, Wolfgang, who had recently been learning to play the violin, begged to play with them. His father refused to let him and told him to run away. But the second violinist called him back, saying, "Never mind, little man, wipe away those tears and stand by me." So close beside him stood the little chap, and presently all were surprised to hear a clear, clean-cut tone coming from the child's violin. His touch was so executive, His interpretation was so masterly that presently the second violinist laid down his instrument and listened breathlessly, while Wolfgang played on and on, forgetful of everything but the magic spell of the music. And as his father listened, his heart throbbed with pride and joy, and tears rolled down his face as he exclaimed, "Little music king, thou art my Wolfville, and thou shalt reign over us all." From that moment, it was plain that Wolfgang Mozart was a musical prodigy, and as little Nanyan, too, had great talent, the proud father now determined to show them to a world which was ever eager to applaud such genius. And in 1762, he made his first experiment of taking the children on a concert tour. This was so successful that before Wolfgang was 8 years old and his sister 12, they had appeared at the courts of Vienna, Paris, Munich, and London. And everywhere Wolfgang made friends with rich and poor alike. His personality was so full of charm and simple dignity. Once, during their travels, being detained by a heavy shower at yachts, they took refuge in a monastery. The monks were at supper and did not know of the arrival of any stranger, until suddenly from the chapel came the wonderful music. Music grave and gay, sad, sweet, thrilling, and marvelous in its appeal to hearts and souls. The fathers were frightened, not knowing who could have entered their sanctuary, thinking it must be a spirit. When at last a light was brought, and creeping into the chapel, they discovered little Wolfgang at the organ. Not a vision, but just a mortal boy. The fathers were overcome with amazement and lavished all possible courtesies on the wonderful little musician and his family while they remained. On entering Vienna at the custom house, Wolfgang, after a brief chat with the official there, took out his violin and played to the official, who was so delighted with the boy and his music that the family had no trouble with examination of their luggage as they would otherwise have had. The imperial family of Vienna were all very fond of music and had also had their courtesy greatly excited in regard to this child prodigy. So, it was not strange that only a few days after Mozart arrived, Leopold should have received a command to bring his children to play at Skoppum, an imperial palace near Vienna, and this without any effort on Mozart's part to get the invitation. The emperor was delighted with the little sorcerer, as he called Wolfgang, and besides listening to his real playing with deepest interest, he made him play with one finger, in which the little fellow was perfectly successful. Then he asked him to play with the keys covered by a piece of cloth, which he did instantly, and this musical tricks, suggested by Emperor's fancy, thereafter formed a far from unimportant part of Wolfgang's repertoire on his long concert tours and always interested his audiences. The boy had a keen sense of humor and always entered heartily into any joke that was made with him. But sometimes he could be very serious, as for instance, when he was called to play for the court composer George Weigelsel, who was himself a proficient performer on the harpsichord. The emperor stepped back when Weigelsel came forward, and Mozart said very seriously to him, "I play a concerto by you. You must turn over the pages for me." And turn the pages the great man did. The emperor ordered 100 ducats to be paid to Wolfgang's father for the performance, and the empress, both then and later, was kindness itself to both the children, and sent them expensive and beautiful clothes. In writing to a friend at that time, Leopold Mozart said, "Would you like to know that Wolfer's dress is like? It is the finest cloth, lilac colored, the best of Morris of the same color, coat and top coat with a double border of gold." In the portrait, which is in the Mozart's collection of Salzburg, Mozart is painted in this dress, and he wore it with as much ease as if he had always been to such finery. Also, he never showed any embarrassment or self-consciousness when in the presence of royalty, and once jumped on the lap of the Empress Maria Theresa, put his arms around his neck and kissed her as officially as if she has been his mother, while he treated the princess as if they were his sisters. Maria Antonia was one of his great favorites. After she helped him from the severe fall on a highly polished floor, to her great amusement, he thanked her by saying, "You are good, I'll marry you." And when the Crown Prince Joseph, who afterwards became emperor, played the violin before the little prodigy, he explained, "Fie, at something he did not like, then that was false," at another bar, and finally applauded with cries of bravo. Little Naniel, who played only less well than her remarkable brother, was a charmingly pretty, piquant little girl, whose manner, both in society and in the concert hall, was winning and demure, while Wolfgang's grace and elegance of manner were striking. Whenever the children went, people went mad over them. They were the fashion, the furor. No musical entertainment was a success without them, and they were so petted that they might easily have been spoiled, and had it not been for their father's wise and watchful care. But this true German caution, the father guarded them from bad effects of overexcitement or indulgence. All sorts of presents were constantly given them, among which were many jewels and beautiful articles of clothing. But the clothes were only used on concert nights or special occasions. The jewelry were kept locked up in a box, and the children were only allowed to see or handle it when they had been specially good. When Paris was the headquarters of the travelers, all possible honor was given to them, and the concerts in the French capital brought the Mozarts a substantial sum, and they were received very kindly in a visit to the court of Versailles, of which visit little Naniel said later that her only recollection was the Marquise de Pompadour standing Wolfgang's on a table, that he wanted to kiss her, and when she drew back, he said indignantly, "Who is she that she will not let me kiss her? The Empress kissed me." The king's daughter were very kind to the children, and on the New Year's Day in 1764, the Mozart family dined with the royal family. Wolfgang sat next to the queen, who talked to him in German, translating the conversation of Louis XV, while near Wolfgang sat his father and his mother, and his sister sat on the opposite side on the table of toffee. After playing at Versailles, the little musician became the fashion in Paris, and every circle was open to them, while Wolfgang's reputation as a musical genius was steadily growing, and he had already composed two sonatas which were really good piece of work from an artist's point of view. Leaving Paris, at last the Mozarts arrived in London, and after taking lodgings, they hastened to adopt English customs. "How do you suppose," wrote Leopold Mozart to a friend, "my wife and girl look in English hats, and the great Wolfgang in English clothes?" Also, immediately, they were requested to play at Buckingham House before the king and queen, where they met the exceptional kindness and appreciation, and the London visit was an unqualified success, one brilliant performance following another in quick successions, until it seemed as if the quaint, charming little music king who made such an imposing appearance on the stage must be really an old and grown up, as he seemed when playing in public. But while they were in England, in lodgings in Chelsea, which was then the open country, Leopold Mozart was very ill for a time, so the children could not practice, and for a while were obliged to run wild, and it would have been hard to imagine that the bright little German girl and the pretty boy, busy making houses and grottos and arbors out of stones and earth and leaves at the rear of their longings, were the infant prodigies of the concert stage. But even then, while he could not use the harpsichord, little Wolfgang was composing, and when tired out of door sports, would sit down with his sister beside him and work on symphony for the orchestra. And it was thus that his earliest symphonies were composed, which were all marked by real artistic form and feelings. The chief advantage of these compositions, however, was the Wolfgang's kept in practice, and was able to announce that at this next concert all the instrumental numbers would be his own compositions, which of course made a great impression on his audience. Again, they were invited to the court, but this time Leopold Mozart felt obliged to have 6 sonatas of Wolfgang for harpsichord and violin printed and dedicated to the Queen. So the visit was not the financial benefit to the Mozarts that the first one had. And from that time, the concert tour brought in less great returns than those of the previous months, for both his sister and Wolfgang were seriously sick, but they recovered and journeyed on to Holland, where Wolfgang was called to play before the Prince of Orange and commanded to write 6 sonatas for the princess. Also to write a variation of the harpsichord on the melody which is sung, played and whistled by everybody in Holland and is the rich Dutch national hymn. The little composer was also called upon for various other pieces of musical work, and in no way disappointed his critics or his audiences. Again, the trio journeyed on, stopping wherever the father felt that his son's fame might be increased by a concert. To Paris they went again, then through France to Switzerland, and finally journeyed homeward, reaching Salzburg in November of 1766. And it was a matter of great interest to their friends to find the children who had left home 3 years ago still happy, hearty boy and girl, despite all their new worldly experiences. Old and young came to bid them welcome, to hear the story of their adventures, and to see the numerous and costly presents about which they had heard so much. They found pretty Naniel prettier than ever, and Wolfgang, notwithstanding the previous illness he had recently had, looked normally well and happy, and was as childish in his interest as if he had not become a public idol. It is said that at that time, so glad was he to be at home again, that he rode merrily around the room on his father's stick as he had done 3 years before, and played with his favorite cat just as he used to do, the cat having been well cared for in the absence of the family by a friend. During the tour, Wolfgang had created for himself an imaginary kingdom, which he called Rücken. This country was to be inhabited entirely by children, and he was to be the king. His idea of the place was so distinct that a friend had to draw on a map of the cities in it, to which he gave the names, and his friends were completely fascinated to hear him talk of his droll conceits when he was not holding them, spellbound by the magic of the music. And now, as soon as they were settled down again in their home, Leopold Mozart began to instruct Wolfgang seriously in counterpoint that he might be thoroughly fitted for his life work. And then, as his precocious childhood begins to merge into young boyhood, we find him working indefatigably, working with his fingers and brains, every faculty alert to conquer technique and achieve perfection in his art. In the summer of 1767, when Mozart was 11, they started on a new tour for which the little prodigy composed 4 pianoforte concerti, which were interesting on account of certain harmonic effects produced in them. But that second tour was not a fortunate one, for during it both Nanyan and Wolfgang was taken with smallpox, which took a very violent form, and poor Wolfgang lay blind for 9 days, and convalescence was slow and hard to bear. Again they visited Vienna, but there they found things greatly changed. For while in former days music was always a feature of great social gatherings, now the only pleasure seemed to be in balls, and there was absolutely no interest shown in Mozart, the child prodigy. Also, much jealousy was shown towards Mozart by other musicians, and when Wolfgang set to work on an opera to be used with the text written by him by the Viennese dramatic poet of the day, and had already completed the score of 614 pages, it was said that Wolfgang had not written it at all, and that it was his father's composition. To contradict these statements in the presence of several prominent critics, Leopold opened a volume of Metastato at the first era, which he placed in front of Wolfgang, and before that assemblage of critical older men, the boy seized a pen and wrote without hesitation. Music to the era of several instruments, and with such incredible swiftness that the company watching him were dumb with amazement at his ability. But matters did not grow brighter. All sorts of unpleasant incidents occurred to embitter the tourists, and at the end of the family returned once again to Salzburg. At that time, Italy was the mecca of the musician, and to study and win his first laurels, there was the ideal of every musical student. The musical atmosphere of Salzburg was narrow and provincial, and Leopold Mozart wished Wolfgang to escape from it. So presently we find young Mozart and his father journeying southward to Italy. When Wolfgang is studying, meeting interesting people, playing in public, and writing amusing letters home to Nanyan, who was becoming more devoted to her home duties now than to her music. But even so, it was always into her ears that Wolfgang poured her his musical feelings, sure that he would be understood. When he was in Rome, he saw in the Sistine Chapel the painting of the Last Judgment, while listening on the wonderful music of the Misereres, which music is only performed in Holy Week by the Pope's choir, and no one was ever been allowed to have a copy of the music or even see it. But so accurate was little Mozart's memory that after leaving the chapel, he not only wrote the music correctly, but could also sing it perfectly, a feat which was made by him the musical marvel of his age. For 2 years, he worked and studied and accomplished great things musically. Then the Elector of Bavaria invited him to write a comic opera for the carnival, which invitation the boy joyfully accepted and at once set the work on the none too easy task. He was now at home again, and his father and his sister listened eagerly to his themes as bit by bit he elaborated them. In due time, the opera was finished. It was called La Finta Gadira, and Wolfgang accompanies his father and her pretty sister set off to Munich, where the performance was to be given. Where the court life was very gay just then, when and where his sister and Wolfgang were sure to have much to amuse and interest. Nanyan was taken to board by a widow who lived in the old marketplace, while Leopold and the young composer were obliged to take the rooms near to the court. At once rehearsals of the opera began, and the days were marked by successions of exciting events for Wolfgang and for her sister. Into those apartments of Wolfgang ran half a dozen times a day to report progress. Up and down the street, humming bits of the opera and intent on some new scenic effect, dashed the young composer a dozen times a day, and he and Nania were perfectly sure that no performance ever was or ever could be so marvelous as this one was to be. At last, the great night came. Nani was dressed in a dainty white gown hours before the time, but Wolfgang, who was detained at the opera house until the last moment, had just time to jump into his fine new costumes of satin and lace, with the flash of brilliance in his cuff and on his slippers, without a glance in the mirror, but he looked like a proud young prince when he joined his father and sister, although the hand that he slipped through Anania's arm was trembling. Who could say that the evening would hold triumph or a failure? No wonder he trembled. When they arrived at the opera house, it was crowded to the doors. All the court was there in gala dress, but The youthful music master, scarcely 19 years old, then sat with his father and Nanya, unmindful that all the eyes were focused on him, forgetful of all but the performances of his opera. The music began, and from the first note to the last, the opera was a triumphant success. Young Mozart then became the object of the wildest enthusiasm, and from that moment, his popularity as a musician was established. There, let us leave him as he stands before us in his stately costume, bowing acknowledgement of the applause raining upon him, with the blaze of light shining full upon his clean cut, dignified face when he hear his famous compositions played. Let us think back to that night of his first great public triumph when he was 19 years old. Pianist, violinist, composer, little music king, and the great genius as well. The world owes a debt of gratitude to Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, which can only be paid in the coin of appreciation. So, dear children, you have learned about Mozart, the boy musician. You probably recognize at least one song he wrote. Even if you don't know what it was written by Mozart, I hope you enjoyed learning about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and enjoy listening to some of his beautiful music. So, dear children, with these words, I end my lesson. Hope this lesson would be beneficial for you in your studies. Thank you.